Point-and-click adventures are one of the oldest genres in video games to date, being the natural evolution of text-based adventures and the far-off dream of the friendless D&D player. These games sought out to challenge players' creativity and problem-solving skills. The first true instance of the point-and-click adventure was the game Mystery House, released in 1980. This was a massive leap forward and saw developers' online systems adding a very rudimentary graphics system to an otherwise primarily text-based adventure, and thus, the point-and-click adventure was born.
For those of you savvy video game historians, you might be thinking to yourself, well gee, the 80s weren't very good times for video games, now were they? They crashed in 82. Well, you'd be right and you'd be wrong. You see, while the Atari 2600 was busy crashing harder than the 2008 Guns N' Roses comeback album, computer games were largely unaffected.
Remember that little company from earlier? The ones that made Mystery House? They went on to become Sierra, one of the mega giants that helped solidify the point-and-click genre. Maybe you've heard some of their hit games like Space Quest, or maybe King's Quest. Can't forget about Bob Byrne Quest, Pig Quest, Firefighter's Quest, Car Dealership Salesman Quest, Johnny Quest, Bird Quest, and Quest Love. My only real knowledge of these titles comes from watching Dan from Game Grumps play through them. He grew up with these titles, so watching him breeze through them is akin to watching Faker play League of Legends. Half the time, I don't know what he did, how he got there, or why that even worked, but nevertheless, it's impressive. If there was one thing that made these games stand out, it was the writing. While die-hard fans will praise the puzzles, in my eyes, they're just a bit too convoluted. Where the writing really takes off is in the humor, breaking the fourth wall, messing with player expectations, and pulling out some really obscure references. All this culminating in an experience that is just fun to watch. These games would push Sierra into the stratosphere, and when that happens to studios, the obvious next step is to start publishing more games than they develop. This company is responsible in part for a large library of classic games, and without Sierra, video games just would be fundamentally different. Speaking of game companies that fundamentally changed games forever, let's switch over to the company that everyone expected to see in this video.
Lucas farts.
God, that's a real knee slapper. Anyway, I couldn't make this episode without talking about LucasArts, but I've only played a few of their games. Back in the day, I didn't really know how computers worked, considering that when most of these games came out, I was under 10 years old, so understanding computers was really not in my wheel well, and it still really isn't, so I've enlisted the help of an expert on the subject. Please put your hands together for his second appearance on this channel, Matty from The Game Show.
Alright fellas, so does this mean, like, if I punch my card here 3 more times, I what, get a free burrito or something?
Hold on, let me ask my HR department. Yeah, I think we can do that.
Alright man, nice one. First of all, thanks for getting in touch. Yeah, as Dakota already mentioned, adventure games are very close to my heart, and this is something that I've spoken a lot about on my own channel. In fact, this very subject is something that I've often thought about myself.
Clam bake.
Carrying on from where Dakota left off, Sierra soon found competition from a lot of hungry new games developers who were looking to build on and improve the model which Sierra had laid down. One such developer was a little known software house based out in Marin County, California, known as Lucasfilm Games. Lucas would start out by nipping at Sierra's heels with games like Ron Gilbert's Maniac Mansion, but their adventure games just weren't as popular and they just didn't sell as well as Sierra's. Not even a game featuring Indiana Jones could knock Leisure Suit Larry off the top spot. That, of course, is until the release of The Secret of Monkey Island in 1990. With Gilbert now gaining Tim Schafer and Dave Grossman to his roster, The Secret of Monkey Island helped to define the in-house LucasArts adventure game style, and they did this with wacky 90s humour, with a strong focus on storytelling and a streamlined distillation of that adventure game experience. Before Monkey Island came along, adventure games were pretty unfair. If you made the wrong decision in a Sierra game, the main character would get killed. And sometimes this would just come out of the blue, meaning that you could lose loads of progress. Worse yet, you could sometimes find yourself in a completely unwinnable situation because of a decision that you made earlier in the game, meaning that you know how to start the entire game from the beginning. Monkey Island was designed to address these exact problems, to be player friendly first. No unwinnable situations, no player deaths. The puzzles might be hard, yeah, they might require a bit of moon logic, but you'll never find yourself in a situation where progress is impossible. Gilbert had developed a contextual menu for Maniac Mansion, as he hated having to type out what you wanted the character to do in older adventure games. This required guessing what keywords had been programmed into the game, and also making sure that your spelling and syntax matched exactly what the developers had intended. Maniac Mansion showed you the expected syntax and just let you select the commands yourself. Monkey Island then refines this design even further and would actually then go on to be improved upon even more in subsequent games. As the adventure game genre matured into the 1990s, Lucasfilm Games started to dominate the market, overtaking Sierra in both review scores and sales. The Lucas method of adventure games became the de facto adventure game standard. Lucasfilm Games changed their name in the mid-90s to LucasArts, just as the adventure game genre was reaching its cultural peak. At this point in time, adventure games were consistently topping the highest rated and highest grossing games lists of any given month in any given year. Here in the UK, way more kids had Amigas than they did Nintendos, and no doubt this is why the genre was so much more popular over here. As the 90s rolled on, the invention of the CD-ROM changed everything for the better. The disc format allowed adventure games to now reach their full potential. Voice acting, FMV, and CD quality music gave games like Full Throttle and The Dig some serious clout. The Dig specifically is my favourite of the 2D era of LucasArts games. Based on a story by Steven Spielberg with dialogue written by Orson Scott Card, The Dig features the voices of award-winning actors Robert Patrick and Steve Bloom. With a far more sophisticated contextual mouse control, a meaningful and thought-provoking story, The Dig is a very mature, cinematic feeling game. Far more than just irreverent humour and colourful characters, The Dig is probably the most grown-up game that LucasArts had made up until that point, at a time when the games industry was really trying to tap into that adult market. At the same time though, the advent of the 3D accelerator card saw the PC industry shift significantly. Games now started costing quite a bit more to make, and these extra changes in hardware saw the rise of the most significant genre to date, the FPS. LucasArts were a crucial part of this fledgling genre, in fact, releasing their own Star Wars Dark Forces the same year as they released The Dig. Even though the CD-ROM format afforded adventure games higher resolution graphics, more colours, hours of quality dialogue and music, the market started to demand flashier action games that showed off those expensive Voodoo and GeForce graphics cards. Games like Quake and Duke Nukem in 1996, Quake 2 and Jedi Knight in 1997, these games would bury adventure games released the same year. Grim Fandango was intended to be LucasArts giving the now floundering adventure game genre a big shot in the arm. 3D visuals, incredible music, brilliant story, brilliant voice acting. Grim was massively acclaimed when it was received, scooping up awards from every magazine, every website, and every schoolboy out there. PC Game of the Year, best graphics, best music, it got them all. But Half-Life came out the same year, and history has sort of proven who won that fight. Grim Fandango also didn't make the jump to consoles, and the adventure genre as a whole just didn't work with what was now the standard way of playing computer games. By the end of the 90s, LucasArts and pretty much everybody else had ditched the adventure game genre, as big publishers have never been interested in big flashy trophies and shiny medals if they're not going to be pouring sugar into the shareholders' pockets. Maybe a slightly undignified end for my favourite genre of game, but hey, you know, the market wants what the market wants. Tim Schafer, Dave Grossman and Ron Gilbert would continue to work together for years to come. These three are basically the holy trinity of adventure games, each one of them being responsible for keeping the torch burning well into the 21st century. Games like Sam & Max, Broken Age and Thimbleweed Park have shown that a huge market share isn't required for success. And this would segue nicely into a bit about indie adventure game developers, but I didn't write anything about that, so I'm just going to hand this back over. Thanks very much for your time, everyone.
While we've looked at some heavy hitters in this genre, let's look at some titles that are maybe more my demographic speed.
Humongous Entertainment is the kind of company that would put you on its shoulders just to help you dunk the ball. Bangers are the only kind of game that this studio puts out. I mean, come on. Putt Putt, Pajama Sam, Freddy Fish, Spy Fox, and there was one other. It's on the tip of my tongue. I just can't remember it.
You talking shit about Fatty Bear? I love Fatty Bear. Fatty Bear saved my life!
Oh, of course, yeah, Fatty Bear. These developers were able to pack so much into games that really might only last 2 to 3 hours. That is, unless you're a shut-in like me and spent most of your day playing the Juice minigame and Putt Putt Goes to the Circus. You know, like, instead of actually moving the story forward. These titles were able to foster creative problem solving, learning about various subjects, and contextualizing fears that kids might be having. The puzzles were never too hard, and the solution was just a few minutes of critical thinking away from being reached. Unfortunately, the studio's now defunct, but the IPs are owned by Night Dive, so they're at least in good hands. Growing up just a little bit, the next logical step from Humongous Games would be to Her Interactive's Nancy Drew series. If Humongous Entertainment packed a lot of learning into a 3-hour game, then Nancy Drew packed an entire college degree into an 8-hour title. Now, Barbie may have had every job under the sun, but Nancy Drew knows at least 3 styles of kung fu, can speak fluent Latin, and understands the intricacies of running a ski lodge to a 5-star Yelp standard. What has this young woman not done? Seriously though, a lot of the puzzles in this game require a lot of reading from books scattered around the map. There's even a notes section that helps you keep track of important information that you've learned along the way for quick reference. The animation in these games gives off a real uncanny valley vibe. You may have thought you were picking up a Scooby-Doo type mystery, but the second you meet your first suspect, things turn into Twin Peaks very fast. Seriously though, Her Interactive has been putting out Nancy Drew games since 1998. Their first 2 games had to be played across 3 separate discs. 34 games made across 22 years, Nancy Drew is essentially the land before time of video games. Impressive, yet slightly excessive. But all of that was the heyday for point-and-click adventures. Where are we now? The biggest point-and-click adventures to have come out in recent years have been nothing but classic LucasArts titles retooled for the modern era, and Broken Age, which is, well, I guess another spin-off from LucasArts considering Tim Schafer was an old employee. So where is the genre now? I've compiled 8 different games that all came out within the last 5 years, and we're gonna look at them to see how the genre has moved forward. So let's start at the lowest point in the barrel. Demetrios, the big Cynical adventure, is what you would get if you asked Tim Buckley to make a game back in 2004. Rampant, weak toilet humor, disgustingly drawn characters with 0 animations, a plotline that is uninteresting at best and boring at worst, and all around just a waste of 10 hours of my time. Now I know that the less than serviceable writing could be chalked up to a poor translation or a difference in cultural humor due to the fact that the developers are French, but writing is half the appeal of the genre. What's the point if I'm not invested in either the plot or the humor? Trophies and cheap prices are the real answer to that question, but trading $1 and 10 hours of my mortal life for a platinum trophy that I'm not even proud of makes me pretty sour, and squarely puts this title in my #1 spot for worst game of the year.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
But bad games are the best way to find out what's important in a genre. The secret to making a well-constructed point-and-click adventure is quality user interface, user experience, and a tightly knit aesthetic. Obviously, you need a good story and fun puzzles, but UI and aesthetics are the mortar holding the bricks together. Demetrios has a surprisingly solid user interface. The way I control the cursor in conjunction with the menu layout is well thought out, and the key reason to why I actually finished this masterpiece. But the aesthetic is uninspired. But don't worry, this is the only bad point-and-click game I subjected myself to. The rest are easy recommendations. The deceivingly titled Football Game by Cloak and Dagger was flocked to by trophy hunters and fans of old-school Sierra-era aesthetics upon launch. If you came here hoping for a weirdly themed sports point-and-click, then you're gonna have a bad time, because this title focuses on teen romance that turns violent. The art style and sound design really sell this title. But for me, my favorite part is the story's pace and how the secrets unveil themselves to you. It feels like a page out of David Lynch's diary during his angsty teen phase. My big issue with this game is that the character seems to suffer from a rare form of amnesia called, oh shit, how are we gonna tell this narrative if the main character already knows more than the audience? Oh wait, let's just say he got drunk and forgets a lot-itis. A truly debilitating disease and one that irks me in video games, but all the same, it attributes to a pacing that I can't get enough of. It's cool to see newer developers try their hand at older styles of games. As a fan of most things sci-fi and British, Her Majesty's Spiffing is a sort of fun romp that brings traditional genre tropes into a 3D environment. The humor of this game is streets ahead of the competition. Not to mention, the art style and music are impeccable. Now, I know that the Unity engine tends to get a bad rap these days, but good golly, Miss Molly, look at these models. They're filled with life and character. A trend that is sort of forming with these games is the focus on shorter overall experiences. I got the platinum for this game in under 2 hours. Likewise, I got the platinum for Football Game in under an hour. As a modern gamer who's also a fully functioning adult who has goals and dreams and who has to also deal with Evan on a regular basis, I don't have 40 hours to run around solving one puzzle like I did when I was a kid. These shorter entries have tight puzzle design and brisk pacing that keeps me from looking up a walkthrough. It's faster and more interesting to solve these puzzles on my own than to go to GameFAQs. That's one hell of a feat to pull off. And again, this is an indie studio, so I really don't mind coughing up 18 bones for a 2-hour experience like this one.
Right. The plan is, we head out, walk around aimlessly, look at a load of stuff eliciting a series of wry remarks, then start clicking everywhere until something happens.
I linger in the background and provide a series of hints if you feel things are a little too vexing.
Why break tradition, eh, Sub-Lieutenant Jones? Let's go!
Little Acre is another game that was recommended to me by one of those easiest platinum lists. What I was not expecting, however, was an adorable, heartfelt adventure featuring art that looks like it came from early Disney-era cartoons. While the animation can look clunky at times due to it being 2D in a 3D space, the game is an easy 10 out of 10 and is the king of modern day takes on the traditional stylings of this genre. Take my word for it and buy this game. Kona, much like Her Majesty's Spiffing, is a 3D take on the point-and-click genre. You play as a detective sent to unravel the mysterious death of a wealthy banker in the snowbound northern part of Canada. What follows is a trek to find the darkness that looms underneath this small town. This game haunts me. For some reason, I just can't stop thinking about it, and that's unsettling. I've had nightmares of waking up trapped in this abandoned snowy wasteland. While that's a definite plus on the immersive side, I just can't shake this game. Aside from that, the puzzles are structured in a very open way, allowing you to do it at your own pace or figure out clues how you want to figure them out. All this culminates to make a sort of 3D open world point and click adventure. It's an extremely captivating title, even if some of the user interface looks like the pinwheel of despair. But I can overlook that because their choice of font is perfection. Armikrog, it's alien, so it doesn't really matter how I pronounce this, I guess, is the spiritual successor to the Neverhood, a game I've always wanted to play and most likely will Neverhood get the chance to do so.
We keep booing. Keep booing, little girl. I will hit a man with glasses.
As the publishing rights have to be approved by EA. I mean, I could play it illegally, but I'm not gonna do that. But at least I'll get a taste of what I'm missing out on with this spiritual sequel made by the same developer. Out of all the point-and-click games I've played, this is the most difficult one. Whereas most games in this genre are rooted in real-world scenarios, allowing for patterns to be easily deciphered. This game takes place in a fictional avant-garde space world. While the art style and music are breathtaking and unique, the puzzles are intimidating. It took me a solid 20 minutes just to get acquainted with the play area. Figuring out puzzles in this game gives out such a sense of accomplishment because you're solving an alien conundrum with no frame of reference. And while it may not make a whole lot of sense, it's more understandable than the weird solutions seen in other games like Maniac Mansion, oh, I don't know, where you microwave a fucking hamster to continue. The final example is another case of the last game I played being a cornerstone of my thesis for this video. The revamped King's Quest game is the perfect summation for what this genre needs to stay relevant and serves as a brilliant metaphor for passing the love of this style of games onto a new generation. The story takes place while King Graham is lovingly recreating his adventures for his granddaughter. The graphics, the sound, the mechanics, and the overall feeling really just push me into this world. This is one of the only times playing these games where I felt so immersed that the notion of getting help from the internet was just outright not present in my mind. The story is so warm, the jokes are perfectly timed, and the mechanics are up to date to not feel frustrating. This was truly the shot in the arm that Sierra needed. The genre of point-and-click games is one birthed out of necessity. Hardware and software limitations forced developers to think of fun ways to tell stories and present puzzles, and this worked back in the 80s and 90s. We don't have those limitations anymore, but that doesn't mean that these types of games are dead. Clever puzzles, witty humor, strong stories, and intuitive UI are all hallmarks of this genre, and are not just resigned to the mechanical nature of their namesake. I don't know if games like these will ever have the same amount of cultural relevance that they once saw, but I do know that they've inspired a myriad of new developers to keep the genre growing and changing.
It says here that you want me to say Lucas farts? I'm not saying that.
Once again, thank you to Matty from the game show for helping us with this episode. We really appreciate it, and we'd really appreciate it if you, the viewer, would go check them out. It's well worth your time.